Well, at the Builders Show this past year, the editors with NRHA and Hardware Retailing magazine got a chance to track down a very popular Mark Delaney with the NPD Group. As a leading market research company, NPD Group provides consumer and retail information on the industry. Check out what Mark had to say about the show and the industry as a whole. We asked Delaney what differences he noticed between today's Gen Y consumer, which is defined as consumers between the ages of 11 and 29, and the Gen X consumer, or the consumers who fall between the ages of 30 and 49.
Well, just from a broad brush perspective, you've got sort of Gen Y and like the baby boomers who play different roles. The best example I can give is one I give fairly often. If you take someone who's a Gen Y consumer walking into a big box retailer, they probably got the iPod in their ear, they're probably texting someone on their way in and out of the store. Those folks are probably just as happy to find a web-enabled kiosk or something like that, where they can just simply go in, punch in the item number or whatever they're looking for, get some product information, find out where it is on the shelf, and then once they picked it up, they're quite happy to go through a self-checkout, swipe their debit or credit card and be on their way. If you compare and contrast that to someone like my father, who's the absolutely quintessential boomer, he wants to have that person in the store, he wants to have that human interaction, and he actually becomes quite indignant with self-checkout because he figures, if he's paying money for a product, he should be waited on, etc., etc. So.
Then we asked Delaney for ways to attract today's younger consumers, or the Gen Y consumers.
Certainly inventory, that's important because a lot of the research that's done now for products is done online. Especially the younger the consumer is, the more likely to do it online. So a lot of the time they spend doing that research, what they want to make sure is the product is in stock when they show up at the retailer. So especially with a big box retailer who's trying to carry a fairly broad assortment, that creates quite a challenge, obviously, from a supply chain standpoint. And the opposite is true with a small independent retailer because they're not carrying as broad of an assortment, but they have to make sure that the item is in stock and on the shelf when the consumer comes in. Right?
Next, we asked him what advice he had for retailers trying to stay price competitive in today's economy.
I guess there's a broad sort of generalization that you can use that a lower income consumer is going to be more sensitive to price, right? But you have to be careful with that because what's happening lately in the last year or so since the economy hit the skids is that, frugality is becoming fashionable. All of a sudden walking around with a triple latte isn't quite as fashionable as it was a year ago. So the folks that have the higher income that you would think are less sensitive to price are actually spending more time sort of going around shopping for price and things like that. And actually, if you look at the Gen Y consumer, you'd be amazed how many of those consumers are actually talking and bragging about how cheaply they got a pair of jeans or how cheaply they got a item in a home improvement store. So that's a real 2 or 3 year shift versus a few years ago where it was all about I have the most expensive toy on the block, right?
And we asked his observations about what housing trends he was noticing this past year.
Well, the thing that's interesting, especially if you talk to some of the builders who are at the show, one of the trends that you're seeing in housing is, even though we've seen housing decline by anywhere by some horrific amount here in Las Vegas, but lesser amounts in other areas of the country. The fact of the matter is, the issue of affordable housing is still the #1 concern for anyone under the age of 40, let's say, right? I have folks that work on my team who are in their 20s. I don't know how, I live on the North Shore of Long Island. I don't know how a young consumer is going to be able to go out and purchase a house there. It's just, So what we've seen is trends towards either multifamily housing or, there's actually development I just saw when I was down in North Carolina last week that has on the main floor retail, right, and on the second or third floor is housing. So it's condos, townhouses, that sort of thing. So Gen Y is starting to show signs of actually sort of wanting to move back to sort of the downtown sort of neighborhood approach, which if you think about it, is a perfect opportunity for a small retailer because you're not putting a big box in one of these small developments. Right, you're actually putting small, independent, either mom and pop or the smaller, two-step retailers that we talk about, like a Do It Best or a True Value or something like that.
We also wanted to see if Delaney could offer some tips for the independent retailer.
3 words: service, service, service. Right. It's been all over the press, the issues that some of the big box retailers have had around service. Certainly they're taking steps to get that corrected. But in the meantime, I think people are crying out, especially now. We haven't seen in our research, we haven't seen that people are going to do less projects. But what we have seen is that they're going to do smaller projects. So they're not doing anything that involves cash out refinancing and things like that. But they still need to redo the bathroom. They still need to, if they have relatives coming for the holidays or something, touch up an area of the house. So those actually play very well into the small independent retailers because those folks can actually service those consumers versus if it's a big remodel, it's hard to have the assortment on hand to be able to service that sort of thing. So actually I think the future is pretty bright for them.
And finally, we asked Mark about what products he anticipated being popular in the future.
There's a few things that we're looking at real closely going into the second half of this year. I think vacations are one of the first things people take off their list of things to do when the economy goes south. So staycations, which is our new term, those are becoming very popular. And if you think about it, sort of the concept of like cocooning is what I call it. If there's so much negativity out there, and every day you like open the paper and you hear about jobs being lost and all that sort of thing, I think everyone's sort of reaction is to sort of go home, right, close the blinds and sort of appreciate the fact that you have a home and you have a family and all that. So I think that will actually prove to be somewhat of a benefit to home improvement retailers because albeit the products will change, folks will still want to make their homes feel as much like they're on vacation as possible. So you may see things like, trends in outdoor living go up. So things like fire pits and outdoor furniture, things like that, barbecues, things like, so that if I have to give up on my vacation, right, I want to be able to sit on my patio or my deck and make it feel like I'm in a fancy hotel, albeit I won't be, but that's okay.